All right, so you guys have made it. We're in session 5 of XOXO, and this past Sunday, we just kind of did a Q&A type session. Brandy and I did, but today in our groups, basically we want to talk about kind of the 3 aspects of healthy relationships. And so I want to kind of just walk through kind of these 3 things and then let you guys kind of chime in different ways. But kind of the first aspect I think about when I think about a healthy relationship is understanding that relationship is going to take work. I mean, it just does. It requires work. Like everything else, it requires character work, and it requires prayer work, and it requires scheduling work and working on ourselves. And so I'd love to know from you guys' perspective in marriage relationships and dating relationships, what are some practical ways these days that you're working on your relationships?
So for us, we just got married 6 months ago, and what we've institutionalized is date night. Because from what we understand, we've talked to a lot of married people, and if you don't stay adamant about setting time aside and treating the person like you're dating them, and you get too comfortable, that's when things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
So we decided that we wanted to do that, go ahead and get that fixed in so that when the kids come along and when things start getting out of control, that we have this sort of thing that we can always fall back to.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
What we're doing.
It reminds me, it's similar to something Brandy and I do, and I can't remember who told us this, but somebody early on when Brandy was pregnant said, if you can do this, always put your kids to bed at 8 o'clock. And we've done it. We've all, even with all 3 of our kids, even with our oldest kind of getting up there in those teenage years, we try to put them to bed at 8 if we can, because then it gives us the evening for us to be together. So it hasn't become just about the kids, although a lot of our life revolves around the kids. We have that time at night to just kind of get ourselves kind of refocused on what happened during the day, what do we need to work through, what do we need to talk about. So that's kind of a practical way, something we kind of put in place so that we can continue to work on the relationship. Anybody else?
For us, I think our small group has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we work on our relationship just by daily, but for us to have that to look forward to and kind of those relationships that we have together as a couple, and then just going to church together and that being a part of our life has been helpful.
That's awesome.
And I'm kind of lazy, so work's a bad word for me.
Yeah.
So having some of those tangibles like you were talking about helped me get that done.
Yeah.
I think that, and I'm not married, but being in a relationship and working on that relationship also involves a lot of working on yourself while working on growth in that relationship, like prioritizing self-growth as well as that relationship growth. Like I've been in situations where, like you said, it's like, go, go, go. Everything's like full force and you're just like excited about the relationship and you're running. And all you're thinking about is progressing in this world that you kind of lose sight of growing individually, and that only benefits the other person and the relationship more,
Yeah, I think there's that. I think as that temptation when you're single, your whole focus to be about finding the right person, when the reality is the challenge is becoming the right person.
Right.
And if you'll become the kind of person you're looking for, then that's where your focus should be. All right, so it's going to require work, which that's just not a real sexy idea when it comes to relationships, but their work. Number 2 is dependency on God. There's this verse, Psalms 127, verse 1. It says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And I think that probably a lot of people in our groups right now that are listening in their relationships, there's probably a lot of different levels of what this looks like. And there's some people that maybe God's not involved in their relationships at all. There's probably some other people who God's in the mix of the relationship, like he's kind of there, but he's not necessarily at the center of the relationship. I would love to just honestly hear from you guys about what does that look like for God to either be in the mix of the relationship or God in the center of the relationship. What's it look like for you guys?
I think for Jake and I, we've been dating for like 6 years before we got married. But there was
This might be a record.
Right. There was a point though that we had some breaks. There was a point where we had broken up, and I think
about 5 months.
yeah, we broke up for about 5 months.
Did you
before,
date other
like-
people during that time?
No, I know that I specifically, when we broke it up, I specifically was like, I'm going to focus my attention on God. And kind of like you were saying, Danielle, like focusing on myself, getting some things figured out. And I'm not sure if I should be with Jake, but maybe at the end of this period, maybe we'll come back together, maybe we won't. I don't really know. I don't really care. I'm just going to focus on this.
She was pretty convinced that we weren't going to get back together.
Right.
I was pretty convinced that we were, but God let me know that that was the time that I needed to focus on Him, and my growth with Him.
Right.
And
And
that
I
was
think
after
it's
you started paying for the ring too, right?
The ring was done. The ring was paid off.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I think it's just crazy because while I was working on my relationship with God in my time, I hadn't spoken to him about what I was doing at all, and he was working on his relationship with God during his time. And so when we came back together, we were both in a different place spiritually, but we didn't know. We hadn't collaborated on that. So it was cool. It really felt like God had orchestrated it entirely. Absolutely. And so far in our marriage, it's been good, but I think, unfortunately, I feel like I've lost a little bit of that personal time. I haven't been as dedicated because it's like, oh, we'll do our Bible study together, or we'll go to small group, or we'll do whatnot. But I do think that that's one thing that I do need to reinstitute back into our relationship. Like you're saying, that triangle kind of thing, making sure that God's the center. And I think one way to do that would be to just still value my own God, like time with God, my own relationship with God, and have that benefit our relationship overall.
I think the key for us has been that we both first make a commitment to take care of ourselves and have done a pretty good job of that. And the pinnacle of that is probably our spiritual growth. We come at it from a different perspective. I learned about God in Alcoholics Anonymous page in church, but we both have our own individual approaches to our spiritual growth, but then we also have our collaborative approaches to our spiritual growth, and we include our children who all have their own path and their own, thank God for Crosspoint, because they drag us when we don't, we used to drag them, now they drag us, but it's a lot more than just church. It's everything and every day. Yeah. And so I think what's critical for us is that we're both trying to grow spiritually and remembering that God is either everything or He's nothing, and I'm choosing everything.
That's awesome. So I want to talk about this third aspect. So, it requires work, it requires dependency on God. And then I think in every relationship, for it to be a healthy relationship, there has to be a really good dose of grace. Because we talked about this all the way back in week 1, that any relationship, it's complicated because you have two imperfect people, you have two sinners that are coming together in a relationship. And I think where a lot of relationships head south real quick is when one person starts to think the other person is a bigger sinner than they are.
Right.
And so what does it look like? How are you guys in the context of your relationships really showing grace to each other? And I'm sure it's not always easy, but how do you show grace? Danielle, in a dating relationship, how are you showing grace these days?
I think it's just realizing that, like what we said before, everybody's wired differently. And just because I feel a certain way about something doesn't mean that the other person feels a certain way about something. And just because, a person makes this type of mistake doesn't mean that it's any worse than my type of mistake. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of, realizing that there are all different kinds of people in the world, and some are meant for you and some are not, and you have to accept people for their flaws, and that people's decisions don't define who they are. If you know a person's heart and you care about a person and you're, on that level with them, that, when they mess up, and it's fine, because at some point, probably not far around the corner, you're going to mess up, and then you're even, and yeah, just forgiveness, grace, all that stuff, it's imperative.
Is it possible, I'll ask the two singles here, is it possible that sometimes the most grace-filled thing you can do in a relationship is to allow that other person to just go on their separate way?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I was in a pretty bad, verbally abusive relationship, and the best thing to do is just, I'm usually very quick to forgive and to forget, and sometimes and being a people pleaser, that tends to let people just walk all over you. And so like I didn't really understand grace. I thought I was giving grace, but I didn't realize that keeping that type of toxic relationship was not only hurting us, but hurting our relationships outside of that, and especially with Christ. And so that's when I realized that it was time to just let go and go our separate ways. And we're both better for it, and we're both very happy where we are. And so it's definitely a huge step, especially with someone that you know so well, and it's when it's so personal, so much involved, so much invested. That's hard to let go, but it's definitely the best thing.
Jake and Lulu, what's grace look like for you guys?
I think one of the things is just making sure that I'm not comparing my strengths with her weaknesses, because when you do that, you're always going to look like you're in the right. Yeah. And so I try and sort of go about it from the other side of things, and it's like, okay, well, she might have messed up here, but let's compare her typical to my typical. I'm like, I should just go ahead and be like, baby, no problem. I love you. Keep stepping.
Yeah. I feel like also one thing that you do, which is really awesome, is there's a lot of times too where I'm like, oh man, Jake asked me to do this and I didn't do it. I'm like, he's going to be really mad. And you come back and you're like, hey babe, did you do the thing? I'm like, no. And you're like, it's okay. And I'm like, no, it's not. And you're like, it's fine. I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, because I think too in my head, I get this little scenario like Jake's going to come back and he's going to be really upset and then he's going to be disappointed and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, it's really not a big deal. Or I know you just have sometimes you do a really good job of putting things in perspective, especially like depending on whatever happened that, I don't know, that distracted me in the first place. Like, I don't know. I think you just do a really good job of letting things go. And I don't know if people call that picking your battles or whatnot.
Yeah. Rose and Paige, grace.
It's never, ever going to be 50-50 all the time. And sometimes I can bring 90% of the effort to the relationship in page 10, but more often than not, I'm bringing less. And so in those times that the other person is not able, for whatever reason, Paige's dad died recently and, it really hit her hard. And so it was really a season of me needing to show up and show up more than I was accustomed to. And that's just the way it is. Sometimes it's going to be Paige's turn to show up, like when I had 2 big surgeries in 1 year, and she had all sorts of horrific things that she had to tolerate and put up with me, because I'm a terrible patient.
I believe that would be true.
No.
Terrible. And we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we pick on each other all the. I mean, it doesn't matter. We're planning on
dying together.
Yeah, we're planning on doing this together. So I think the more grace we can give each other and acceptance and love and forgiveness, it's going to make that stretch a lot more fun.
Yeah.
I'm a lucky dude.
Yeah, you are.
I am.
Yeah, I think for all of us, there's that reality of relationships require a grace that I don't know we have the real capacity to give. And that's where our relationship with God comes in. And when we see the grace that God has given us, that's where we then have this supply of grace that we can extend to other people. So I hope this conversation will be a great one for you guys. I want to say thanks to each one of you guys for being here, being so open. And you guys don't know this watching this, but they really don't know each other. And they just kind of showed up. They do know. Yeah.
I know you really.
You're around Rose for 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
But thank you guys for being so open and honest about your relationships, and we hope that in some way maybe it's helped kind of get conversations going for you guys. I know we've enjoyed our time together, and we're just praying for you guys, praying for all your relationships. We talked about in this session, it's a lot of work, but man, it is worth every second, because at the end of the day, we're called to do 2 things: love God and love people. And so just praying for you guys, praying for your relationships, and hope that this series has been a good one for you and for your group.